A 26-year-old engineer walked into a foreclosure auction with $5 in her pocket and walked out with a deed to the house her great-grandfather built by hand in 1958. The whole town laughed. 12 months later, that $5 house had been assessed at 36,000 times what she paid for it. This is how it happened. Subscribe so you don't miss what comes next. The thing about a Tuesday morning in January is that it carries no particular promise. The sky over Millhaven, Tennessee was the color of old dishwater, and the county courthouse smelled the way government buildings always smell: floor wax, bad coffee, and the particular staleness of decisions being made by people who'd rather be somewhere else. Sierra Calloway had driven 4 hours from Atlanta to be in this room, and she'd done it on 4 hours of sleep, on a stomach that held nothing but a gas station coffee and a granola bar she'd eaten in the dark at a rest stop somewhere outside Chattanooga. She was 26 years old, and she was wearing a red leather jacket she'd bought at a Goodwill in Decatur for $11, and her dark hair was pulled back in a way that said she'd meant to fix it and then decided it didn't matter. She sat in the second-to-last row of a room that held about 25 people, and nobody looked at her twice, which was exactly what she needed. The foreclosure auction for Millhaven Township drew the usual crowd: contractors in work boots, investors in khakis with laptops open, a few people who'd wandered in off the street. The auctioneer, a thin man named Gerald who'd perfected the art of sounding bored without being rude, moved through the docket at a steady clip. Sierra kept her paddle in her lap and her eyes on the sheet in front of her. Lot 14, 318 Maple Street. Residential. 420 square feet. Minimum bid, $1. She had memorized the listing so thoroughly that she could have recited it backward. She had also memorized the county parcel history, the lien timeline, the original deed of record from 1958, and the medical debt that had triggered the foreclosure, $47,000 in chemotherapy and radiation bills that a 71-year-old woman named Helen Calloway had not been able to pay before she died. Helen Calloway, who was Sierra's grandmother. Sierra had not been in this room by accident. She had been planning this moment for 14 months. Since the day she'd found the certified foreclosure notice in a stack of mail she'd been forwarding from Helen's address 3 weeks after the funeral, while she was still driving to Atlanta with everything she owned packed into the bed of a 2011 Ford F-150 that also happened to be her bedroom. Gerald read the lot description the way he read all of them: flat, professional, already thinking about lunch. Lot 14, 318 Maple Street. Residential structure. 420 square feet. Sold in as-is condition. Outstanding liens, cleared by the county. Minimum bid is $1. Do I have a bid? A contractor in the third row leaned toward the woman beside him and said something that made her press her lips together to keep from laughing. Nobody raised a paddle. Gerald waited 5 seconds, which in auction time is a small eternity. Going once, Sierra raised her paddle. Gerald's eyes found her in the back row. $5 to number 31. Do I hear 10? Silence spread through the room like something spilled. A few people turned to look at her. She kept her eyes forward. Going once, going twice. The gavel came down. Sold? $5. To number 31. The contractor who'd whispered didn't bother lowering his voice this time. That girl just bought the worst property in Millhaven County. Sierra heard him. She signed the transfer paperwork at a folding table near the door, paid cash from an envelope she'd been carrying in the inside pocket of the red jacket, and walked out into the January cold with a deed in her hand and an expression on her face that the county clerk, a woman named Ruth Ann, who'd worked that desk for 22 years, would later describe as not happy exactly, but settled, like she'd just finished something she'd been carrying a long time. The question people in Millhaven would ask for weeks was why she'd bid $5 instead of $1. The answer was something Helen had told her when Sierra was 9 years old, sitting at the kitchen table on Maple Street while her grandmother pressed apple slices into a pie crust. If something's worth having, you pay a little more than the minimum, even if it's just a little. It's how you remind yourself it has value. She thought about it again on the drive to Maple Street, alone, before she let herself feel anything beyond the cold and the coffee wearing off, and the particular quiet of a town that had already made up its mind about her without knowing her name. The house at 318 Maple Street was worse than the county assessor's photograph suggested, and the photographs had not been flattering. Sierra parked at the curb and sat in the truck for 30 seconds, not from fear, but from the discipline she'd learned in 3 years of structural engineering, the practice of looking at a damaged thing before touching it, of letting the full picture settle before the analytical part of her brain started parsing and solving. The roof had lost shingles in wide patches across the south face, bare plywood showing underneath like exposed skin. The front steps had split down the center. A diagonal crack ran across the foundation wall at the southeast corner, wide enough that she could see it clearly from the sidewalk. The mailbox was gone entirely, just a post leaning at an angle that suggested someone had hit it with a car and driven away. The yard was dead grass and packed earth, a few shrubs along the fence line that had not been tended in years. She got out of the truck and walked the exterior first, slowly, hands in her jacket pockets, studying the roof line, the grade of the lot, the way the foundation wall sat in relation to the soil. Her eyes moved the way they'd been trained to move, looking for displacement, for patterns of settling, for the difference between surface damage and structural failure. The diagonal crack at the southeast corner was significant looking, but, she noted with a quiet exhale, consistent with shrinkage rather than settling. No displacement. The crack had opened over years of thermal cycling, not because the foundation was moving. She crouched and pressed 2 fingers against the edge of it. Surface level. Ugly, but not dangerous. She pulled a small notebook from her jacket and wrote, "Foundation, shrinkage crack, SE corner, surface only. No lateral displacement. Fill and seal, 2-part repair." Then she went inside. The smell hit first, mildew, old plaster, something animal she identified almost immediately as raccoon. The main room was 12 by 16 feet. The floors were warped, the ceiling was stained in 3 places from roof leaks, and the kitchen sink had pulled away from the wall and sat at an angle, the supply line disconnected. The bathroom had no door. The single bedroom was closet-sized, with a window cracked corner to corner. She walked every inch of it. 420 square feet. Takes about 4 minutes to walk if you're being thorough. And Sierra was always thorough. She tapped walls with her knuckle, listening for the change in resonance that told her where the studs were. She pulled up one warped floorboard near the kitchen doorway with the pry bar. Underneath, white oak, original, tight grain, still sound. Where the plaster had crumbled away, the studs were old-growth timber, dense and dry. Whoever had built this house in 1958 had built it to last. And it had lasted through 66 years of weather and neglect and a foreclosure that had stripped it of everything except the thing that mattered, which was the frame. The bones were good. She was in the kitchen, running her hand along the base of the doorframe, between the main room and the back hall, when her fingers found the gap in the plaster, a section that had bubbled and separated from the lath beneath. She pressed it and felt it give. She slid the pry bar behind it carefully and pulled, and a section of plaster the size of a dinner plate came away, and behind it, wrapped in wax canvas and tied with a piece of leather cord, was a book. She unwrapped it on the kitchen floor, sitting cross-legged in the cold, and opened it. The handwriting was her grandmother's. She recognized it from birthday cards, from the labels on jars of jam, from a grocery list she'd found tucked in Helen's Bible and kept for reasons she hadn't examined closely. The first entry was dated March 1978. She turned to the last entry, dated 11 months before Helen died. The handwriting smaller and less even than the earlier pages, but still unmistakably hers. If the house goes, let it go with its secrets. But if someone comes back who knows where to look, the kitchen wall, the plaster that always sounded different when you knocked it, then this belongs to them. Sierra sat with that for a moment. Her grandmother had known. She had always known the house might be lost. She had put the journal somewhere a developer wouldn't think to look, and a Callaway would. Divided the Josephine clumps along the south fence today and reset them in amended soil. Joseph helped me carry the bags. He said they wouldn't take in this soil. I told him to wait. 46 years of garden notes, plant names, bloom dates, soil observations, hand-drawn diagrams of every bed and border, pencil lines showing where the light fell at different hours, notes in the margins. Coneflower east bed. Peak June 15. Joseph likes to sit near these when they're up. Joseph Callaway, Sierra's great-grandfather, who had built this house himself because no bank would lend a black veteran the money on a lot he'd paid for in cash because cash didn't require a banker's signature. Sierra sat on the floor of the kitchen that Joseph built and read 3 pages and then stopped because her vision was blurring and she refused to cry on a cracked linoleum floor so she pressed the back of her hand against her eyes for a moment and breathed. Then she set the notebook carefully on the counter, photographed the cover, the first entry, the diagrams, and went back outside to write more notes. She had a foundation to repair, a roof to replace, a raccoon situation to address, and somewhere in a cardboard box in the truck bed, carefully packed between 2 sweaters and a roll of vapor barrier, 14 envelopes of seeds from her grandmother's garden, given to her by a neighbor who'd found them in Helen's freezer after the estate sale. She had not known, until this afternoon, what they were for. By Wednesday morning, the news had moved through Millhaven, the way news moves through any small town. Not through any single channel, but through all of them simultaneously. The way water finds every crack at once. At Harlow's Diner on Church Street, 2 men in their 60s shook their heads over eggs and said the girl must be out of her mind. At the post office, a woman who recognized the Calloway name from Helen's funeral said it was a shame about the grandmother, but that house should have been torn down 2 administrations ago. At Bellamy's barbershop, the general consensus was that a 20-something from Atlanta had no business buying a condemned property and that the whole block would be sorry for it. Nobody asked what Sierra's qualifications were. Nobody considered that she might have any. Brent Colton, the mayor of Millhaven, was a heavy-set man of 54 who had held his office for 11 years and who took the appearance of the town's residential streets as a reflection of his own competence. He drove past 318 Maple Street on Thursday morning and looked at it through the windshield of his Chevy Suburban for approximately 8 seconds before calling the building department from the car. "That property on Maple is a liability," he told the clerk. "Get code enforcement out there first thing Monday. I want a full violations report on my desk by noon." He did not mention, on that call, or any subsequent one, that he had been in discussion for 5 months with a real estate developer named Marcus Hale about a mixed-use retail project that required the acquisition of the entire 300 block of Maple Street, 7 parcels in total, of which 318 was the last outstanding piece. He did not mention this because it was not technically public business yet. What he told himself was that he was acting in the interest of neighborhood aesthetics. What he didn't examine too closely was the dinner Marcus Hale had taken him to in Nashville 4 months ago at a restaurant where nobody looked at the prices. Tyler Calloway called Sierra on Thursday evening from his apartment in Chicago. He was 31 years old, worked in commercial insurance, and had inherited from somewhere in the family gene pool a tendency to lead with concern in a way that came across as authority. "Sierra, Mom called me." Sierra, who was on her knees in the kitchen, scrubbing raccoon evidence off the floor with a brush and a mask on, tucked the phone between her ear and her shoulder. "Mom calls you every week, Tyler. She called me because she found out your phone plan has been registered to a parking structure in Buckhead for 6 months. You want to explain that?" There was a pause that contained a great deal. Sierra set down the brush. "I've been staying in the truck," she said, temporarily. "That's not temporary, Sierra. I know what it is." Her voice was steady in the way a voice gets when someone has already processed a thing so many times that the rawness has been worn smooth. "I lost the job at Patton & Rowe 8 months ago. I've been doing freelance structural consult work. It pays, just not enough for Atlanta rent and a legal defense at the same time." Legal defense. What legal? I'll explain it when there's more to explain. Right now, I have a house to fix. Tyler was quiet for a moment. She could hear him breathing, working through the architecture of what he'd just been told. "Sierra, why didn't you say anything?" The question was genuine. And because it was, she answered it honestly. "Because I didn't want to watch you and Mom decide what to do about me. I'm not a problem to be solved." She picked the brush back up. "Come down sometime when the house is worth looking at. I'll show you what I'm building." Sierra filed 4 permits the morning after the auction. Foundation repair, roof replacement, electrical upgrade, plumbing. She filed them before she drove a single nail, before she brought a tool into the house, before she told anyone in Millhaven what she planned to do. The process took 2.5 hours of paperwork and cost more than the house had. She paid without complaint. When the code enforcement officer, a young man named Colin Reeves, maybe 25, with an earnest manner and a clipboard he held with both hands, arrived on Monday morning, Sierra met him at the curb. She was wearing work pants and a thermal undershirt, and her hair was back. And she had a look on her face that people who knew her recognized as focused, and people who didn't know her sometimes misread as unfriendly. Colin introduced himself and explained that he'd received a complaint about unpermitted structural work on the property. Sierra reached into the back pocket of her work pants and produced an envelope. Inside were 4 permits, each stamped with the county seal and the building inspector's signature, each dated the previous Wednesday. Colin went through them page by page. His expression moved through official to careful to something that was almost embarrassment. "These are all in order," he said. "I know they are," Sierra said. "I've been filing building permits since I was a 22-year-old intern at a structural firm." "Who filed the complaint?" Colin looked at his clipboard. "I'm not able to disclose that. You don't have to." She took the permits back. "Tell whoever sent you that the work is up to code. Every bit of it." She started on the foundation that afternoon. Hydraulic cement mixed in a 5-gallon bucket in the side yard, troweled into the crack in thin layers. She had done this on parking structures and hospital wings and a bridge rehabilitation project in Savannah. And the principle was the same, regardless of scale. Clean the crack. Apply bonding agent. Fill from the bottom up in layers, no thicker than a 1/4 inch. Let each layer cure before adding the next. She worked until the light failed and then set up her work light and kept going. She was sleeping in the house now, sleeping bag on the floor of the bedroom, a battery lantern on the window ledge, the truck parked in the side yard. It was cold at night and she knew it was cold, and she did not particularly care. She had been cold before. Vic Mason's hardware store on Route 9 was a concrete block building with hand-painted signs and a loyalty card program that Vic had been running since 1987. Sierra came in on Monday of the second week with a list written on the back of an envelope. Vic was behind the counter, a compact man in his 60s with reading glasses on a beaded chain. He read through the list, 14 items, each with a technical notation beside it. Hydraulic cement, type S, 12 bags, vapor barrier, 6 mil polyethylene, 200 SQFT, treated lumber, 2x6, 16 lengths, 8 pieces. He looked up at her over the glasses. "Your husband or boyfriend coming by to help load?" Sierra did not change her expression. She tapped the list. The hydraulic cement is for a 2-stage foundation repair on a shrinkage crack, northeast to southwest diagonal, southeast corner of the structure. The vapor barrier is going behind the new subfloor framing. "I went to Georgia Tech, structural engineering. I've been doing this since before I had a driver's license, technically." Vic looked at the list again for a moment. Then he set it flat on the counter. "What kind of discount you looking for?" "Contractor rate." He studied her once more, not unkindly, but honestly, the way a person looks at something they're revising their understanding of. "Load out back," he said. "I'll pull everything." He extended a hand. Vic Mason, Sierra Calloway. They shook. He didn't offer to help her carry the bags. She would later tell Dot that this was how she knew she liked him. Dorothy Hargrove had lived at 322 Maple Street for 31 years. She was 72 years old, small-framed and precise, with the economy of movement that comes from decades of work done outdoors with your hands. She drank her morning tea on the front porch regardless of the weather. She had been watching 318 Maple Street since the truck first appeared in the side yard in January, watching the way a person watches something they are deciding whether to invest in. She watched the permits go up in the window. She watched the code enforcement truck come and go. She watched Sierra carry lumber from the truck to the side yard, lay the pieces out on sawhorses, measure and cut, carry the pieces inside. She watched all of this and said nothing for 6 weeks, and then on a Thursday morning in early March, she set her tea down and walked across the frost-stiff lawn. Sierra was on her knees at the edge of the front bed, pressing a soil probe into the ground and reading the gauge. She'd been testing pH across the lot for 2 days, working in a grid pattern, noting variations. She had her grandmother's garden journal open on the concrete beside her, weighted with a rock, open to a diagram of what the beds had looked like in 1992. Dot stopped at the edge of the yard. "You need help?" Sierra glanced up. She saw a woman in her 70s in a barn coat and rubber-soled shoes, and she made a rapid and accurate assessment of several things at once. "I'm fine," she said. "I didn't ask if you were fine," Dot said. "I asked if you need help." Sierra sat back on her heels. "Do you know anything about soil preparation? I know more about it than most people who get paid to know about it." Something in her tone made Sierra look more carefully. "Okay," she said. "Yes, I could use the help." Dot came into the yard and crouched beside her and looked at the journal without being invited to. She was quiet for a moment. "This is Helen's writing." Sierra looked at her. "You knew her?" She lived 30 feet from me for 19 years. She taught me how to put up tomatoes. I taught her how to deadhead roses. Dot touched the edge of a page. I was at her funeral. She straightened up. Where did you find this? In the wall, wrapped in canvas, behind a piece of plaster in the kitchen. Dot absorbed this in the way some people absorb extraordinary information, not with visible surprise, but with a kind of internal stillness, a settling. Then let's figure out what she was growing, Dot said, and picked up the soil probe. They worked together for 2 hours. Dot had an eye for grade and a memory for drainage patterns that Sierra recognized as the product of real expertise, not hobbyist enthusiasm. She mentioned, almost in passing, that she'd been doing landscape design for 30 years. Sierra asked for a firm name. Dot was quiet for a moment. My husband's company, Hargrove Landscape and Design. He was the name on the door, I was the design on the paper. The evenness in her voice was not the evenness of someone who had made peace with something. It was the evenness of someone who had carried something so long they had simply gotten very good at carrying it. Sierra filed this away. She filed things the way she filed permits, carefully, with the intention of returning to them. Later that afternoon, going through the seed packets she'd brought from Atlanta, she showed Dot, one labeled in Helen's hand. Josephine, save cold. Dot took the envelope and looked at it for a long time. I need to make a phone call, she said. I think this might be something. Marcus Hale arrived on the second Tuesday of May in a black SUV that he parked with precision in front of 318 Maple Street. He was 50 years old, fit in the way that requires a personal trainer and considerable intention, and he wore a charcoal sport coat over an open collar in a way that said he was a professional but accessible. He had a business card between 2 fingers before he reached the end of the front walk. Sierra was inside installing the subfloor. She heard the car door, heard the footsteps on the new porch boards, and came to the door with a pencil behind her ear and sawdust on her forearms. She recognized the type immediately, the way a doctor recognizes the symptoms of something they've treated before. Sierra Calloway, he said, deploying his smile. I'm Marcus Hale, Hale Development. I've been following the work you've done here with a lot of admiration. I'd love to talk to you about a potential opportunity. The house isn't for sale, Sierra said. The smile held. I haven't offered a price yet. It won't matter what price you offer. This isn't a flip. Hale recalibrated. I understand the sentimental value, and I want to honor that. $150,000 cash, close, in 10 days. You walk away with, I said no. She said it the way she said most things, without heat, without apology, with the simple flatness of someone who has already finished the conversation internally. $200,000, he said. She leaned against the doorframe and looked at him with an expression that was not unfriendly, but was entirely unimpressed. Mr. Hale, you're standing on private property you weren't invited onto, making an offer I've declined twice in 90 seconds. I'm going to ask you to leave, and I'm going to be polite about it exactly this one time. He left. She went back to the subfloor. But she wrote his name in her notebook. She wrote the license plate number of the SUV. She wrote the time and date. She had learned during 14 months of preparing for a foreclosure auction nobody expected her to show up to, that the details you record are the ones you have when you need them. The harassment campaign began the following week. Building department complaints, filed anonymously, noise ordinance violation, suspected use of non-conforming materials, alleged unpermitted work. Colin Reeves arrived 3 times in 2 weeks, each time with the slightly apologetic manner of someone who knows they are being used as an instrument. Each time, Sierra's documentation was complete. After the 3rd visit, Colin paused at the edge of the porch before he left. He looked at the street, then at his clipboard, and lowered his voice. I'm not supposed to tell you this, he said. The complaints are originating from a single IP address registered to an office suite on Commerce Drive. I looked it up because I like to know what I'm actually doing before I do it. Sierra nodded slowly. Thank you, Colin, she said. He walked to his truck. She went inside and updated her notebook. Drew Patton called on a Thursday to say he'd be passing through Millhaven and asked if he could stop by. Sierra said yes, then spent 20 minutes that evening going through the LinkedIn connections of everyone associated with Hale Development. Drew Patton arrived on a Friday in a rental car. He was 28, Stanford educated, and the son of the senior partner at Patton and Rowe Engineering, which was the firm that had fired Sierra 8 months ago for declining to sign off on a load-bearing calculation she believed was insufficient for for the project's seismic risk category. He said he'd heard about the project through mutual connections and thought he could help. He had a warm, open face and the practiced earnestness of someone who has never had to work very hard to be believed. Dot was in the garden when he arrived and watched him from the second terrace without saying anything. Sierra stood in the doorway and listened to him for 90 seconds. Then she said, "I checked your LinkedIn this morning. You connected with Marcus Hale in February." Drew's expression shifted. Just slightly. Just enough. "That doesn't mean I know what it means," Sierra said. "You're here to assess the property for him. Tell him what the renovation has actually cost, what the structural improvements look like, whether it's worth pushing harder. You're going to go back to your rental car and tell him the foundation repair is solid and the floor framing is better than anything in the comp listings, and that's fine. You can tell him whatever you want. What you can't do is be on my property while you do it." She stepped back and held the door. "I'll see you at the deposition, Drew." Amanda Price was 29 years old and had been writing for the Millhaven Gazette for 4 years. Long enough to know which stories were worth the extra week of reporting and which ones could be written in an afternoon. She drove down Maple Street on a Saturday morning in late June because she'd heard 3 separate people mention the house in 2 days, which in Millhaven was roughly equivalent to a press release. She parked across the street and sat for a moment. The house in the county assessor's photographs, missing shingles, tilting porch, bare-packed earth, was now painted warm gray with cream trim and a front door, the color of red clay brick. The yard had been terraced in flagstone, planted beds descending the slope in full early summer bloom, with a shallow depression in the lower corner where standing water looked intentional rather than neglected. Sierra was in the upper terrace bed, on her knees, thinning a stand of black-eyed Susans. She was wearing dirt-stained jeans and the red leather jacket. She'd developed a habit of wearing it when she worked outside, which Dot had pointed out was unusual and Sierra had said was a matter of personal policy. Amanda introduced herself and asked if she could ask a few questions. Sierra sat back and looked at her for a moment. "What kind of story are you writing?" "I'm not sure yet," Amanda said honestly. "Whatever kind it turns out to be." This, Sierra later said, was the right answer. The interview lasted 2 hours, on the front porch, with Dot coming and going and occasionally adding things that Sierra hadn't thought to mention. Amanda was a good interviewer. She asked questions and then actually waited for the answers, which is rarer than it sounds. Sierra told her about the auction, about the $5 bid, about Helen and the foreclosure, and the 14 months of planning. She told her about Joseph Calloway building the house by hand in 1958 because no bank in Millhaven would give a black veteran a mortgage. She told her about finding the garden journal in the wall, about the seeds, about what Dot had identified them as. She told her, and this was the part she'd been deciding whether to include, about Patton and Rowe, about the wrongful termination, about the months in the truck. Amanda wrote it all down. She did not editorialize. When Sierra mentioned that Mayor Colton had sent code enforcement before she'd even started work, Amanda made a note and then asked, very casually, whether Sierra knew anything about the relationship between Colton's office and Hale Development. Sierra looked at her. "I know some things," she said, "and I have documentation." Amanda closed her notebook. "I'm going to need a few more days," she said. The article ran the following Thursday. Front page above the fold. The $5 house. How one engineer bought her family's home back. And what City Hall didn't want her to know. It was 1,400 words. It was shared 6,000 times by the end of the weekend. The second section of the article, a smaller piece on the right side of the front page, was titled, "A Pattern of Approvals, Hale Development in the Mayor's Office." The County Ethics Board requested documentation the following Monday. Colton issued a statement supporting transparency. Nobody was particularly surprised. Sierra posted one page from the Journal on her personal account the night before the article ran. A scan of Helen's hand-drawn garden diagram from 1984 with notes in pencil. Josephine, south fence, full sun, blooms gold June. Joseph sits here in the mornings when the light is good. The caption said, "My grandmother designed this garden for 46 years. The bank took the house. I came back." By morning, it had been shared 80,000 times. By afternoon, she had 47 messages from people she'd never met, many of them women, many of them older, all of them saying some version of the same thing. "My mother had a notebook like that. My grandmother had a box like that. I didn't know what to do with it. Now, I think I do." The call from Caroline Shaw at American Architecture Digest came in late August. Caroline was a features editor who had been doing her job long enough to recognize, within the first paragraph of reading something, whether it was a trend piece or a real story, and the account of 318 Maple Street that had been forwarded to her by 3 different people in the same week was a real story. She was interested, she said, not only in the human element, but in the engineering, the spatial solutions Sierra had developed for a 420 square foot structure, the drainage engineering of the garden, the integration of structural and landscape design as a unified system. We don't usually see this level of technical intentionality in residential work at this scale, she said. Most architects would call it over-designed. Most architects haven't lived in a truck, Sierra said. There was a pause, and then Caroline laughed. A real laugh, not a professional one. We'd like to send a photographer and a writer, she said. With September work? The photographer was a woman named Jess, who spent the first morning walking the property without her camera, the way Sierra had spent the first morning walking it with her notebook, reading it before touching it. She went into the kitchen and ran her hand along the underside of the built-in breakfast counter she'd cantilevered from the wall framing, a detail that had required 4 hours of calculation and looked, in the finished product, like it had simply always been there. Who designed this? I did. Did you have help? Dot helped me plant the lower terrace. Vic Mason sold me the materials without asking if my boyfriend was coming to carry them. Colin Reeves came back 3 times and found nothing wrong. Those are the people who helped. Jess nodded. She went outside and spent 2 hours in the garden before she touched her camera. The magazine article ran in November. 6 pages, full color. The headline was, "The $5 House. 3 generations, 1 engineer, and a garden that waited 46 years." The spread included a photograph of the garden journal, a close-up of Joseph Calloway's original property deed from 1958, and a quote from a structural engineering professor at Vanderbilt who said the load path solutions Sierra had developed for the interior were being used in his graduate seminar on small structure efficiency. It was shared 50,000 times online in the first week. A podcast about vernacular American architecture featured it as a full episode. Sierra listened to the episode in the garden on a Tuesday afternoon, sitting on an overturned bucket eating a sandwich, and felt something she identified slowly, over the course of the episode, as a particular variety of vindication, not the loud kind, but the quiet kind that settles into your chest like heat. The settlement from Patton and Rowe had come through 2 weeks earlier, not as much as her attorney had wanted, but enough. She had donated half of it to a structural engineering scholarship fund at Georgia Tech and used the rest to pay off the last of the renovation costs. She did not tell anyone about either decision, which felt like the right call. 3 weeks after the article published, a letter arrived from the Harlan County Assessor's Office, standard reassessment, triggered by the improvement permits. Sierra opened it at the kitchen counter, the assessed value of 318 Maple Street, $180,000. She read it twice. Then she set it down and looked out the window at the garden, where the asters were doing what asters do in late November, holding on past the point when everything else is given up. Mayor Colton's house, a 4-bedroom colonial on Ridge Road, the largest private residence in Millhaven, had an assessed value of $420,000. Sierra had bought the worst property in Millhaven County for $5. It was now assessed at more than 20 times what the county had valued it at before the foreclosure. Dot was at the kitchen table when Sierra told her. She looked at the letter for a long time. Then she looked up. "Your great-grandfather built this house because no bank in this town would give him a loan," she said. "Now it's worth more than anyone in this town thought it ever could be." Sierra folded the letter carefully and set it next to the original 1958 deed she'd framed and hung on the wall. "Yeah," she said. He would have thought that was funny. Tyler drove down from Chicago on a Saturday in October, the 3rd time he'd made the trip since January. The first visit had been charged. He'd stood in the front yard of what was then still a construction zone and delivered a speech about safety and practicality that Sierra had listened to without interruption and then thanked him for, which had somehow made him feel worse than if she'd argued. The second visit had been quieter but still careful, the way conversations are careful between people who love each other and have recently said things that need time to settle. This visit was different. He turned onto Maple Street and slowed the car without meaning to. The house was finished. He'd seen photographs, but photographs don't carry scale or texture or the quality of October light on flagstone at 10 in the morning. He parked at the curb and got out and stood on the sidewalk. The terraced garden was in its full fall palette, the asters deep purple, the ornamental grasses gone gold, the black-eyed Susans in the upper bed still holding on. The stone walls Dot and Sierra had built by hand were tight and level, each course precisely placed. The paths curved through the beds in lines that looked natural, which Tyler knew, from 30 years of knowing his sister, meant they had been engineered within an inch of their lives. He was still standing on the sidewalk when Diane came around the corner of the house from the garden side where she'd been with Dot. His mother stopped when she saw his face. The four of them ate dinner at the built-in counter in the kitchen. Tyler, Diane, Sierra, and Dot, who had become such a regular presence that Sierra had built a dedicated cup hook for her mug on the cabinet above the coffee maker. It was tight and loud, and someone's elbow hit something twice, and it was the best meal Sierra had eaten since she couldn't remember. Diane was quiet through most of dinner, in the way she'd been quiet since arriving that morning, a watchful, inward quiet. After Dot had gone home and Tyler was washing the dishes with the focused attention of a person who needs something to do with their hands, Diane said, "Sierra, I need to tell you something." The room shifted slightly. Sierra looked at her mother. Diane set her hands flat on the counter. The bank sent a notice about the foreclosure. The first one, before Helen passed. They needed a family contact and she'd listed me. I knew it was coming months before you found that letter in her mail. I told myself it was handled. It wasn't. Sierra didn't move. "I know," Diane said. "I know I should have told you. I decided, and I want to be honest about this because I've been thinking about it for months. I decided that you were already under so much pressure with the job situation, and I thought it would be better if I handled it. I was trying to protect you. I contacted a realtor friend to see about buying it through a regular sale. But the bank moved faster than I expected, and by the time it went to auction, I told myself you didn't need to know." The kitchen was very quiet. Tyler had stopped washing. "Mom," Sierra's voice was even, "you made a decision about information that was mine to have, about my grandmother's house, about my family's property. And you made that decision because you thought I couldn't handle it. I thought I was helping. I know you did." Sierra looked at her for a long moment. "Here's what I need you to understand. Protecting someone from their own life isn't protection, it's control. Even when it comes from love. If you'd told me when it happened, I'd have had 14 months of lead time instead of 14 months of detective work. And I did it anyway, because it mattered that much. Imagine what I could have done if you just trusted me with the truth." Diane's eyes were wet. Tyler was very still by the sink. The silence lasted long enough that it became its own kind of conversation. Then Diane reached across the counter and took Sierra's hand in both of hers, and Sierra let her. "You're right," Diane said. "I'm sorry." "I know," Sierra said. And then, because she meant it, "I know." Tyler came to the workshop the following Saturday. He stood at the back of the yard for the first 20 minutes, watching Sierra walk 22 people through the basics of reading a foundation crack. She had a whiteboard propped against the porch railing, and a diagram that she'd drawn in about 45 seconds that was clearer than anything Tyler had ever seen in a classroom. He watched his 26-year-old sister answer questions from homeowners twice her age with patience and specificity and zero condescension. After the workshop, he pulled her aside. "I want to learn how to do what you do," he said. "Which part?" "Any of it. All of it. I can come down on weekends. Teach me." Sierra studied him. "You understand that means you're the student." "Yes, and that I'm not going to take it easy on you because you're my brother. I would be deeply offended if you did." She almost smiled. "Come back next Saturday," she said. "Bring work boots." In December, Sierra began work on something she didn't describe to anyone, not even Dot. She ordered fieldstone from the same quarry, a different variety this time, rounded riverstone in warm browns and amber, the kind that holds heat from the sun and releases it slowly into the cold. She worked on it in the mornings before the light was fully up, when the street was quiet and the garden was bare-stemmed and still, all structure and no color, the bones of Dot's design visible in a way they wouldn't be in summer when everything was full and blooming. She worked from a drawing she'd made at the kitchen counter one night after Dot had gone home and Vic Mason's delivery had come, and she'd sat for an hour with a pencil and let the idea arrive fully before she put it on paper. On a Wednesday morning, she finished. She came inside and made coffee and waited. When Dot arrived at 9 for their usual morning walkthrough, Sierra took her to the center of the garden, where the 3 terraced beds converged at a natural focal point she'd left open, deliberately, since the beginning. In that open space, she'd built a low circle of stacked fieldstone, knee-high, 6 feet across, fitted without mortar, held by precision and gravity. Inside the circle, on a flat bed of prepared soil, she'd planted the Callaway Heritage chrysanthemum seedlings, 47 of them, in a pattern that followed the diagram from Helen's journal, the pattern Helen had labeled Josephine. They were dormant now, bare soil and the suggestion of roots, waiting for spring. In the center of the circle, on the flat capstone she'd chosen and carried from the far side of the quarry yard herself because it was the right color and the right weight, and she knew it when she saw it, she had carved 3 lines with a masonry chisel she'd borrowed from Vic, and returned the same afternoon sharp as when she'd taken it. For Helen Callaway, who tended this earth for 46 years. For Dorothy Hargrove, who designed without her name. For Sierra Callaway, who came back. Dot read it and was quiet for a long time. Long enough that Sierra began to wonder if she'd overstepped. If this kind of naming, this deliberate act of making someone visible, was something Dot needed to consent to rather than receive. Then Dot crouched and pressed her hand flat against the carved letters of her own name. And the gesture was so close to the one Sierra had made in the garden journal 9 months ago, on the floor of the kitchen, that Sierra had to look away for a moment at the bare switchgrass in the lower terrace. "I have never seen my name on anything that I actually made," Dot said. Her voice was factual, rather than emotional, which made it harder to hear. 30 years. Not once. "It's there now," Sierra said. "And when people come to the workshop and ask who designed the garden, you say your name. You don't say Dot from down the street. You say Dorothy Hargrove, landscape design, 30 years. You don't need anyone's permission to say that." Dot looked at her. "You're a very direct person, I've been told. I mean it as a compliment. I know." Brent Colton came by the following week. Not by appointment, not with advance notice. He parked at the curb and walked up the flagstone path in his khakis and his city hall bearing, and rang the new doorbell Sierra had installed in November. She opened the door and looked at him. He was holding a folded copy of the Gazette from January, the issue with his quote in it. The one that said, 318 Maple Street, was an embarrassment to the neighborhood. He set it on the porch railing between them. "I was wrong," he said. "And the reason I was wrong was self-interest, not ignorance. I want to say that clearly, because it's more honest than saying I didn't have enough information." Sierra looked at the newspaper. "What do you want from this conversation?" "Nothing," he said. "I just wanted to say it in person." She nodded slowly. He turned to go. "Mr. Colton," he stopped. "There's a plaque on the wall of the Civic Park across from City Hall. It has your name on it as the project commissioner." He waited. "The landscape design for that park was done by Dorothy Hargrove 30 years ago. Her name isn't on anything." Colton looked at her. "That can be corrected," he said. "It should be," she said. He walked back to his car. She watched him go, then went inside and wrote in her notebook. Deck 14. Colton came. Said the right thing. "We'll wait and see." 3 months later, a small bronze plaque was installed beside the existing one at the Civic Park. It read, "Landscape Design, Dorothy Hargrove. Hargrove Design, 1993. Dot found out when a neighbor texted her a photograph of it on a Tuesday morning. She was in Sierra's kitchen when she read the message. She sat with the phone in her hands for a moment. Then she set it down and picked up her tea. "Well," she said, "how about that?" In March, the Callaway Heritage chrysanthemums came up. 47 plants pushing through the soil in the stone circle. First the gray-green tips, then the leaves, then the buds. On June 12th, 3 days later than Helen had recorded in the journal. But close enough, they opened gold. The whole circle was gold. Sierra sat on the edge of the low stone wall in the morning light and looked at it. And what she felt was not triumph exactly. It was something quieter and more durable than triumph. It was the feeling of a thing completed. Joseph Callaway had built a house with his hands because no one would lend him money. Helen Callaway had kept a garden and a secret for 46 years. Dot Hargrove had worked for 30 years without her name on anything she made. And Sierra Callaway had bought back a piece of land for $5 and given 3 women, 2 of them gone, 1 of them standing in the kitchen making coffee, a place where their names were finally, permanently carved in stone. Millhaven was not a famous town. Maple Street was not a famous street. But on the morning of June 12th, every neighbor within sight of 318 Maple knew when the chrysanthemums opened, because gold is hard to miss, and the kind of gold that has been waiting 46 years to bloom has a particular quality of brightness that is not quite like anything else in the world. If this story stayed with you, hit subscribe and drop a comment below. Tell me which part hit hardest, and let me know what city or country you're reading this from.